Hey y'all, and welcome back to another episode of Flick Connection, where in less time than you typically scrolling for something to watch every night, we're going to talk about a bunch of unique and unconventional crime movies currently included on Netflix. This list includes a few action-packed movies, a handful of really intense dramas, and even a handful of incredibly bizarre true crime documentaries, all available on Netflix. Thanks to Dream by Beam for sponsoring this video. We'll talk more about how they can help you get a great night's sleep later in the video, but let's start with a throwback Netflix original movie that a lot of people missed, titled Wheelman. In fact, this was released at a time when Netflix wasn't really promoting their Netflix original movies. It was before they started pumping out some real big ones. But in this movie, Frank Grillo plays a wheelman or getaway driver, very similar to Ryan Gosling in Drive, except this movie all takes place in one car over one night, and the camera almost never leaves Frank Grillo's side. Meaning, occasionally you see his point of view and some other camera shots, but you're in the car with him for the duration of this movie, and it actually works. It's very exciting. I would say if you love Drive with Ryan Gosling, this one doesn't have quite as much depth, but it's still an excellent Netflix original action thriller. Jason Statham makes the list with one of his lesser-known movies and one of his more serious flicks. It's titled Redemption. This one actually turns into a pretty heavy drama at times, but it is still a Jason Statham martial arts movie, meaning you get all the beats that you want from a typical Jason Statham flick, but with a much more serious tone and story at its core. And often movies like this, when they take themselves too seriously, it just does not work out. Redemption is kind of a rare exception in the genre where you get heavy drama elements and some mindless action thrown in as well, making this one kind of a standout in Statham's filmography in the sense that on paper it sounds like a typical Statham movie, but in reality it's actually got a lot more to it than you would expect.
So what are we dealing with here? Gun runners? Drug dealers?
It's two women who are counterfeiting coupons.
This feels like a lot. You don't think we're coming in a little hot here?
But next up we've got a comedy, and it's actually based on a true story, making this a funny true crime movie. And it's got a pretty stacked cast. Kristen Bell is the lead character here, but you've also got an amazing, and I mean a truly amazing performance from Paul Walter Hauser. He buddies up with Vince Vaughn in an effort to bring down these QUEENPINs, these women that have started a coupon scam, and it really is a scam. What they're doing is technically illegal. And because this is a comedy, they kind of soften it up. I would imagine in reality, the women behind this had a little bit more of a hard edge to them than Kristen Bell does, but it makes it light and fun. And again, the duo between Paul Walter Hauser and Vince Vaughn is exceptional. It's not the focus of the movie, but it does help round it out in a really beautiful way. And not only is it fun and well-rounded, but the true story of this coupon scam is incredibly interesting.
Call a sketch artist? Like, who do you think she is? Kaiser Soze?
Another true story that is incredibly interesting and that starts out being funny, starts out that way, is Tickled. This is a documentary about, okay, so this one's gonna be hard to explain, but basically, grown men were tricked into being tickled on camera. I don't really want to give away how they were tricked, but you can kind of understand how some guys found themselves in this predicament. But once there's footage like this out there of these guys, then the real crime takes place. And this ends up being a surprisingly wild story. And this is from documentarian David Ferrier, who is most famous for the Dark Tourist series on Netflix. Tickled has a different vibe, but it's very well put together, and it goes to some surprising places. All right, I promised some that were laced with action, and next up we've got one from France that is just like an old school action movie in the best way possible. It's titled Lost Bullet. This movie, for a Netflix original, is packed with real stunts. In fact, the lead actor here is a stuntman, and he's doing all of the fighting, all of the driving. It's really fantastic and feels like a real throwback movie. I mean, feels kind of like a mix between Fast and the Furious and an old Charles Bronson movie. I know that sounds like an odd mix, but if you're into either of those, Lost Bullet has a lot for you. It is French language, but Netflix has a great dubbed version. If you don't like reading subtitles, you could go either way with this one. It's action-packed. It's not like there's a ton of dialogue in it anyway. And on top of having some exceptional action for a Netflix original movie, Lost Bullet is also a really unique crime movie, which is why it makes this list. Now, while routinely failing to get a good night's sleep is not technically a crime, today's sponsor could certainly help you out with it. It's Dream by Beam, which is a luxurious drink blend loaded with all of the best sleep-promoting ingredients. It's a powder that you mix with just a little bit of warm milk about 30 minutes to an hour before bed. I typically enjoy mine about halfway through my last movie of the day. I enjoy Dream even though I'm not someone who has trouble falling asleep. But as I've gotten older, I've noticed that I tend to wake up more during the night, particularly in the early hours of the morning, and I was often having trouble getting back into a deep sleep, but not with Dream. When I drink that before bed, I fall asleep quickly and comfortably, and I stay asleep. And I'll say, even if my 6-year-old daughter has a bad dream and wakes me up in the middle of the night, which does happen, I go right back to sleep again comfortably, and most importantly, I don't wake up feeling drowsy or groggy in any kind of way whatsoever. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I feel great in the morning after drinking a glass of Beam before bed, and that's the point of getting a good night's sleep. Dream actually comes in a bunch of great flavors, plus there's a CBD version and a non-CBD version. I have been drinking the non-CBD version, but the main flavor is like a cinnamon chocolate, which is just really nice and delightful before bed. This one here is actually chocolate peanut butter. I'm actually about to open this one. They've even got a chocolate mint, which is delicious if you like chocolate mint. So if you want to find out the easiest way to get to sleep and stay asleep, click the link in the video description or use this QR code and use my code FLICK to save up to 35% off at checkout. Dream by Beam is clinically proven to help you fall asleep faster, stay asleep, and wake up feeling refreshed. But again, to save up to 35% off, use the link in the video description or this QR code along with my code FLICK. It's a great deal, but speaking of great stuff, let's get back to some of these crime movies. Next up, we've got quite possibly the most disturbing movie on this list, and it comes from executive producer Louis Theroux, one of the more famous documentarians in the world. It's titled Tell Them You Love Me. Now, this is the true story of a therapist who essentially sexually assaulted a very disabled man. Like I said, the story is disturbing, but it's also incredibly interesting. How she could come to do this, how she could come to think that this was completely okay to do. In fact, the documentary features her pretty heavily. She's interviewed throughout, and she definitely feels like she did nothing wrong. And the reason it got ranked kind of in the middle of this list, which is fairly high considering where I'm headed with some of these picks, is because of the way the story was told in this documentary. Now, this is a story I was familiar with through some true crime YouTube channels in the past, yet the reveal multiple times throughout the documentary actually took me by surprise because of the way that they set things up and unveiled them. You're experiencing this weird story from multiple perspectives without even really realizing it. It's done with a really light touch, and I found it to be just supreme storytelling for a documentary like this. Again, I've heard this story before, and they revealed it to me in a really surprising way. But I've actually got another crime documentary on this list, and this one actually went a little viral back when it was originally released on Netflix, The Tinder Swindler. The reason I included it here is because it's wildly interesting if you haven't seen it. Now, especially if you're someone who ever uses Tinder or any of those dating apps, I feel like you need to see this. I was married long before the creation of those things, but the fact that someone was able to do what they were able to do in this documentary blows my mind. I don't want to give really anything away, but if you're into con artist stories, whether they be fictional like Matchstick Men with Nicolas Cage or true crime stories, you are going to love this. This is kind of the ultimate con man story, and similar to Tell Them You Love Me, as far as Netflix original documentaries go, the storytelling here is superb. And then, believe it or not, one of the newer Netflix original movies makes this list, Richard Linklater's Hitman.
There are 3 things you need to kill, man.
Yes.
The gun, Right. The bullets, and the balls, and boy, I'm stockpiling all three of those things.
I thought this was exceptional in multiple ways. A big one was just that it had a different tone than Netflix movies typically do. Not that they're all the same, but there is a sense of sameness, especially when it comes to rom-coms on Netflix, and Hitman just completely stands apart with its own unique flavor, and I think that's largely to do with Glenn Powell. Now, he co-wrote this with Richard Linklater, but he is just one of the more charismatic actors on the scene today, and he kills it in this movie. I also appreciated the fact that this is based loosely on a true story, and it goes into some surprising directions by the end. As someone who just watches an ungodly amount of movies, I always appreciate it when a movie takes a twist that not only surprises me, but that does something I've never seen in a movie before. And while Hitman isn't the most mind-blowing movie of the year, it is the most surprising Netflix original I've seen in quite a while. Now, my next pick would barely qualify as a crime story, so it just squeaks onto the list, but I did include it just because of how unique it is and because of how strongly I recommend The Peanut Butter Falcon.
Hey, what's rule number one? What's rule number one?
Party.
No, not party. No, it's not party.
The main character in this movie is a grown man with Down syndrome who unfortunately has no one to care for him, so he's actually stuck living in a nursing home in this small town where he lives. Dakota Johnson plays his counselor, and one night, with the help of Bruce Dern, he greases himself up, slips through the bars of the nursing home, and literally escapes in his Fruit of the Looms. While he's on the lam, he runs into Shia LaBeouf, who's technically also on the lam, and it becomes kind of a road movie with the two of them becoming friends, and it's really heartwarming stuff, but it's also an incredibly well-rounded movie. It's got some tense elements, some heartwarming elements, some sad elements. John Hawkes actually plays a really great bad guy in this. He's one of my favorite actors and he kills it. Shia LaBeouf is absolutely amazing. And the main character actually has Down syndrome and he does a beautiful job with the role. In fact, it's impressive how well he's able to act and convey through his disability, meaning like his voice is kind of muffled and he's kind of hard to understand, yet you always know how he's feeling about things. He really did a superb job with this movie. I highly recommend it. But next up, we've got a dark, and I mean a dark and twisted crime movie from South Korea that is also just like totally badass. It's titled Believer. Now this one makes the list even though on paper it sounds pretty straightforward. It's like an undercover cop movie where guy is infiltrating this high-level organized crime ring. Again, in South Korea, there's ties to China, there's drug labs in the mix, hitmen, almost like cartoonishly evil characters in this story, but that is what makes Believer so cool. Again, on paper, there's a lot of movies like this where you've got undercover cops trying to infiltrate crime rings, yet this one goes to almost cartoonish levels where it doesn't quite get silly, but the intensity in this movie is insane. There's even a sequel on Netflix that is a Netflix original. Now, I thought the sequel went way too over the top. In fact, I could actually say the same thing about Lost Bullet and probably should have. There is a Lost Bullet 2. It's not a terrible movie, but it went way too over the top and kind of squandered what was so great about the original. And I think Believer did the same thing, and maybe it's because the first one was so close to being over the top, but that is what I think works about Believer and makes it so intense and insane to watch. Next up, we've got one that was just recently added to Netflix. I highly recommended it about a month ago, and here I'm going to talk a little bit more about The CLOVEHITCH Killer. Now, Charlie Plummer plays the lead here. He's a teenage boy who's actually in Boy Scouts when he begins to suspect that his father might actually be the notorious CLOVEHITCH Killer, a local serial killer responsible for the deaths of a bunch of women who has been dormant for a very long time. But he's definitely not sure, and even though he loves his father, he begins to investigate and goes down a deep rabbit hole. Now, Charlie Plummer is great, and following this like teenage boy investigating something very serious is kind of the meat and potatoes of this movie. It's the main thing that you're watching, except Dylan McDermott's performance is absolutely breathtaking in this movie, and don't get me wrong, you're not going to notice it right away. He's just playing kind of a regular old father. But at a certain point, his demeanor changes, and it is totally surprising. I was blown away. He's an actor I've liked for years, but was really impressed with multiple moments in this movie, and just like a few others on this list, this one goes to some dark places.
Awkward talk with Dad. Over.
While this is a work of fiction, I would say people that typically love true crime content will absolutely love The Clovehitch Killer. Next up, we got one that's just like straight up my alley, and just like the Peanut Butter Falcon, it too takes place in the South, Arkansas.
What a lot of people don't know about organized crime in the South is that it's not that organized.
What's with the cones?
Thought the randomness of it might throw off a cop.
I guess that's smart.
Liam Hemsworth is the lead here. I find him to be an incredibly underrated actor. But you've also got a great role from John Malkovich in this movie.
Either of you boys like to call me sir? You can if you want. I won't think it's corny.
We're gonna go traffic drugs across state lines, sir.
And Vince Vaughn steals the show. He's not the lead character, but every scene he's in, and there are a bunch, are the best parts of the movie. I absolutely love it. Now, while the movie does have a unique flavor, I consider this to be like a southern version of Goodfellas or something like that, like an epic crime movie that just happens to take place in the South. And that's not all. You've got a great little role from Vivica Fox and Clark Duke, who's kind of the main supporting actor in this movie. He wrote and directed this. He's incredibly funny. He's been in stuff for years. He's funny in this movie, but he's also from the South, so he worked in a lot of great stuff. Like there's this fireworks store. I see those all the time, and it's a major fixture in the story. So this one just connects with me a lot personally, but I'm telling you, Vince Vaughn with the crime stuff in this is absolutely incredible, and it's not the only Vince Vaughn crime movie I'm gonna mention on this list. In fact, I didn't realize when I was making this list, I've got 3 Vince Vaughn crime movies at least getting mentioned on this list. But next up, Jessica Chastain makes the list with Molly's Game. This is actually written and directed by Aaron Sorkin, and I believe it was his first feature film that he directed. He did a killer job, but per usual, it's also really well written. I mean, very well written. And it's actually the true story of an Olympic athlete who ended up hosting high-stakes poker games. And the games she's hosting are for rich, powerful people, often celebrities.
Either I am messing with you, or you're new to the game, you've had bad cards all night, you should have folded after the flop, and I don't want to win more of your money this way. I've got queens under here. Take your time.
All of that gets depicted in this movie incredibly well. You see how these games are run, how the high-stakes poker games actually play out. But then after she gets caught, Idris Elba steps in as her lawyer, and the whole movie is absolutely fantastic. Again, if you like anything Aaron Sorkin has done over the years, whether it be stuff like West Wing or Social Network, Molly's Game is maybe my favorite Sorkin project I've ever seen. It's absolutely fantastic. But we've got another action-packed movie on this list that is just an incredibly unique heist movie. There's literally nothing else like it. Baby Driver.
I'm a driver.
Oh, like a chauffeur. Anyone I'd know?
I hope not.
This being from director Edgar Wright, most famous for movies like Shaun of the Dead and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and I would put Baby Driver as a close third behind those 2 movies. I'm a big sucker for heist flicks, and they're kind of a dime a dozen. There's a lot of them, yet Baby Driver just does something different. And it's fairly simple. The main character has a real bad case of tinnitus in his ears, and so he's constantly listening to music, yet all of the chase sequences and the action are choreographed to the music he's constantly listening to. It's great stuff. It's lots of fun. Jamie Foxx is a little bit fun. John Hamm is pretty fantastic in it as well. Again, another just well-rounded movie with a bunch of action that's actually not that mindless.
Doc said Michael Myers.
This is Mike Myers.
It should be the Halloween mask.
This is a Halloween mask.
No, the killer dude from Halloween.
Oh, you mean Jason?
No!
If you like the idea of never running out of good movies to watch again, consider clicking that subscribe button, maybe leave a like and a comment. Those are all great ways to let the YouTube algorithm know you would like to see more content like this again in the future. But we're into my top 3, where I've got some just bone-chilling crime stories, including a Netflix original that just feels insanely real. It's titled The Stranger. In fact, this one feels so real and so raw, it's difficult to tell what's actually happening until you get fairly far in. Now, The Stranger is also based on a true story, but all the names and locations have been changed. But this too is an undercover cop story, and I don't want to give away too many details, but it's about trying to bring in a really notorious criminal. But it's all done in the shadows, and the filmmaking style puts you, as the viewer, constantly in the shadows. You're constantly in this criminal underbelly. You're never quite sure who's going to get caught or found out. It's incredibly tense, but again, has this sort of simmering style that does not let you know where it's headed at any given time. It feels like a completely unique experience. It makes you feel a bit lost at times, but ultimately it brings everything together, and it makes for, again, a very raw and realistic crime movie experience. But my number 2 pick is kind of an odd one, but again, this is a list of unusual crime movies. We've got another one from South Korea. It's titled The Wailing. Now, this one revolves around a bizarre sickness breaking out in small villages, and you actually follow a police officer who has to find out what's going on before something similar happens to his daughter. But what's so interesting about The Wailing is you get these dark, almost like supernatural elements. You're trying to figure out what's going on, but you're along for the ride with this cop who's not very good. He makes mistakes, he fumbles things, he doesn't quite seem to know what he's doing. In fact, he feels pretty lost at times, and the movie does a great job of putting you right in the passenger seat with him. Meaning he's not this like crack shot detective that's making these brilliant discoveries like Sherlock Holmes. Like, you're actually worried he's not gonna figure out what's going on, and this goes into a direction that just has more twists than a bag of pretzels. As I said, it's insanely dark, but if you like that type of stuff, The Wailing is top-notch. Now, I said I would mention another Vince Vaughn crime movie on this list. I'd like to mention Brawl in Cell Block 99, but that's not my number 1 pick. While I highly recommend that movie, and it's a highly unusual crime flick, the same director had his most famous movie most recently added to Netflix, Bone Tomahawk.
Lean back. Right there. Bracing.
This is gonna penetrate.
Both movies are available on Netflix right now, at least they are here in the US. By the way, there's a full list of all the titles we discussed down in the top pinned comment, along with other streaming services that might be hosting these titles right now in the US, Canada, the UK, and Australia. Again, down in that top pinned comment. But Bone Tomahawk is an incredible Western that doesn't feel like anything else you've ever seen. If anything, it's a Western horror movie that doesn't quite feel like a horror movie. In this movie, you're with a stacked cast that create a posse, and by stacked cast, I mean Kurt Russell, Matthew Fox, Patrick Wilson, Richard Jenkins, David Arquette is in this movie. Sid Haig even has a role in this, and this goes to some incredibly dark places. In fact, for some people, this might be the darkest movie you've ever seen at times, or at least at its climax. But leading up to that, it's a killer modern-day Western that has some creepy vibes, but isn't gonna totally freak you out. And then once you realize what's actually happened to the person that they're looking for, they really turn up the heat with this one. There's a reason it's so popular. I mean, this one has some stuff in it that is gonna stick with you. You're not gonna be able to forget it. It gets that wild, but that is the list. Don't forget to go check out the link for Dream by Beam if you wanna get some better sleep. But I will keep making these videos as long as y'all keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this Netflix episode, and you will see me on the next one.